Here stands the SpaceX Starship. It possesses tremendous size and immense power, representing the first rocket ever constructed with a legitimate chance of transporting humans from our planet to Mars. Despite all its remarkable dimensions and capabilities, the Starship remains far removed from being a comfortable spacecraft for interstellar travel. The voyage ahead will be extended, hazardous, uncomfortable, and somewhat unpleasant. This experience will test our spacebound pioneers to their absolute limits. Therefore, if the Starship intends to transport humans to Mars, what will that journey truly entail? The original vision for the Starship proposed that the complete upper section of this 50-meter-tall rocket would remain completely accessible for both passengers and freight. This included approximately 1,000 cubic meters of expansive open-plan floors and enormous viewing windows, creating a very upscale atmosphere. Subsequently, SpaceX commenced test flights of Starship prototypes and attempted landings, which initially proved quite unsuccessful. An extended phase of experimentation, failures, impacts, and detonations followed. Among the most significant modifications made to Starship throughout this period involved repositioning the auxiliary fuel tanks designated for the landing sequence. These tanks were relocated upward from the rocket's base into the nose section. When observing the flip maneuver the vessel executes during its landing approach, the rocket's lower portion swings around in a pendulum-like motion. Having your fuel located down there is undesirable. The preferred location is up top, where the vessel maintains greater stability. This modification proved highly effective, though it does result in the entire conical section becoming inaccessible to the crew. Consequently, the large viewing window is no longer feasible. Then SpaceX progressed to launching the Starship completely into orbit and successfully returning it, which prompted another substantial design revision. The rocket required enlargement. During 2025, SpaceX initiated flights of the Starship V2. This presents some complexity because while the exterior dimensions increased by roughly 2 meters, the updated Starship actually features reduced interior capacity with approximately the same vertical space eliminated from the cargo section. Their approach involved extending the fuel tanks upward into the payload area. This modification provides the Starship with additional propellant for operation, enabling the vessel to transport both itself and a 100 metric ton payload all the way to Earth's orbit. Therefore, if we were journeying to Mars within the Starship as it exists currently, we would have approximately 500 cubic meters of inhabitable volume. While that represents half the initial design, it's still not a small amount. The International Space Station provides around 900 cubic meters of interior volume distributed throughout a cramped network of tight corridors. Additionally, the station maintains a permanent crew of 7 individuals. It has even accommodated 13 simultaneously. Consequently, how many individuals could we realistically accommodate inside a Starship V2 for the complete journey to Mars and the return voyage? Fortunately for us, NASA previously funded research on this exact question back in 2013. Their findings indicated that for a crewed Mars mission with an anticipated duration of 2.5 years, every individual would require a minimum of 25 cubic meters. This doesn't refer to private quarters. It simply means 25 cubic meters of overall space allocated per individual, approximately the same volume as a standard shipping container. Based on that research, our Starship V2 could accommodate up to 20 individuals at maximum capacity without SU. Substantial risk of psychological breakdown. However, we must also acknowledge that crew quarters differ from cargo capacity. A Starship configured for human occupants will require flooring, partitions, and a central column containing a ladder for vertical movement. Furthermore, the complete lower level of our Starship habitat will be allocated to an airlock and cargo storage because eventually we hope to touch down on Mars and venture to the planet's surface. Taking all of this into account, our 500 cubic meters rapidly contracts into a suffocating predicament. Perhaps you could make it functional with a crew of 6, but that won't enable us to establish a Mars colony. This is where Starship V3 enters the picture, the elongated Starship extending it to 69 meters in height. Starship V3 incorporates approximately 17 meters of additional length compared to V2. However, this also introduces considerable additional mass. Therefore, the enlarged rocket will require enlarged fuel tanks, meaning we don't actually retain all that extra length for living space. Yet what we ultimately achieve is likely something much closer to that initial Starship vision, with approximately 1,000 cubic meters of interior volume. Thus, SpaceX ultimately delivered on their promise. It simply required some adjustments throughout the development process. You see, we can maintain both realism and optimism simultaneously. It's actually achievable. Now that we've finally determined our living arrangements for our Mars expedition, let's begin designing our interior layout. Beginning from the lowest point, we understand that a cargo bay and airlock must be located there. We can actually develop a fairly clear understanding of what this will resemble by examining the design that SpaceX has previously created for the Artemis lunar landing, which will utilize a modified Starship, likely based on the V2. The lower level will feature a circular airlock that astronauts will access from overhead. Within that circular area is where HEVA suits will be stored. After suiting up, we can transition into the unpressurized cargo compartment. This is where exploration equipment will be housed. Transportation devices, research instruments, cameras, implements for gathering samples, all of that exciting equipment. There's also the elevator. It will be an extremely long descent to the surface. Therefore, we've also caught a brief preview of what SpaceX envisions for the crew lift. It resembles something halfway between an antiquated service elevator and a shark cage. Nothing elaborate, which is beneficial because we need this equipment to remain operational. Alright, that covers level 1. Let's ascend to level 2. This would logically serve as our first pressurized storage area, remembering that this vessel must land on Mars. Consequently, we want to maintain the center of gravity as low as feasible, meaning heavy items belong on the bottom. That's why our water systems, our oxygen and HVAC, our food supplies, and our waste storage all belong on level 2. Ascending once more to deck 3, it would be most logical to position the hygiene facilities, washing stations, and toilet as close to the storage deck as practical. That minimizes our plumbing requirements. This won't be luxurious. Don't anticipate a hot shower during our Mars journey. At best, you'll clean yourself with a cloth and a sink and wash your hair with a dry powder. However, things become truly harsh when we discuss wastewater management. Here's the reality. Without water recycling, we would need to transport 27 metric tons of water for 10 individuals on a 900-day expedition. That represents somewhere between 1/4 and 1/8 of the Starship's total lifting capacity devoted exclusively to carrying water. Yet if we recycle, we can manage with bringing only about 3 metric tons of water. For context, the standard aboard the ISS is that 93% of the water that's consumed is recycled. This means urine undergoes filtration and reintegration into the water supply. It also means that solid waste will be dehydrated and separated into solid waste, which gets stored below. And the moisture extracted is also going to be reintegrated back into the water supply. Astronauts consume their own processed urine. This is what we committed to. According to individuals who have observed the interior of the Starship lunar lander prototype, SpaceX is developing these rectangular hygiene modules that would function as a combined toilet and shower station, and they would be positioned at an angle along the circular perimeter of the ship's interior to optimize the available space. That should provide sufficient open space to locate our gymnasium on the same level. It makes sense to contain all of the unpleasant odors on one floor. Everyone requires 2 hours of physical activity per day, and that must be divided between cardiovascular and strength conditioning. Therefore, stationary bicycles and treadmills with restraints for zero gravity are standard equipment, along with a specialized machine for comprehensive body resistance training. Ascending 1 level to deck 4, and we would arrive at the crew sleeping quarters. This somewhat depends on how many individuals we are transporting with us. If we began with 1,000 cubic meters of empty volume, then installed the partitions and flooring, then occupied 2 complete decks with airlock and storage areas, we're likely left with something in the vicinity of 600 cubic meters of crew space. It's not particularly easy to visualize exactly how much space we're discussing here. Most people don't conceptualize things in cubic meters, so simply understand that the crew compartment of the Starship will be equivalent to a reasonably large residence with 3 or 4 bedrooms and approximately 2,300 square feet of floor area. Certainly not small and entirely comfortable for the typical family, correct? Yet according to our NASA formula for the maximum number of individuals we could accommodate in that space without anyone experiencing psychological breakdown, NASA would actually permit up to 24 individuals to inhabit one house. This aligns with what we've discovered about the Starship moon lander. Once again, according to informed sources, SpaceX is also developing a rectangular sleeping station in the same type of module as the toilet pod. According to renderings, SpaceX can accommodate 20 sleeping berths on one Starship deck. Therefore, that's likely our strongest indication for how many individuals are realistically accompanying us on our Mars expedition. We constitute a crew of 20. It's worth noting that Elon Musk has stated confidently in the past that Starship can transport 100 individuals to Mars in a single trip. While technically that statement is accurate, here's what that scenario would resemble. Bear in mind you would be confined there for 8 months at a stretch. I'm quite certain this qualifies under the category of cruel and unusual punishment. Ascending again, and we've already reached deck number 5, and we can begin incorporating some amenity features. The dining hall or kitchen area. Not that much actual cooking would occur. Preparing a meal in space essentially involves injecting hot water into a vacuum-sealed pouch of dehydrated food. It's not entirely bad, though. Astronauts aboard the ISS still enjoy pizza. It's highly likely that SpaceX would integrate some form of hydroponic greenhouse into the dining area. NASA is currently beginning some trials with cultivating plants in zero gravity, and it should be feasible. I wouldn't anticipate vine-ripened tomatoes, but we might enjoy a bowl of fresh lettuce occasionally. Level 6 is where we can begin opening things up somewhat more. We possess 9 meters of width in this rocket, minus a small amount for the walls and insulation. Therefore, let's incorporate a little respite from the claustrophobia and confined spaces of the lower deck. We require a lounge space, a gallery, large windows, large television screens, perhaps even a painting or two on the walls. Naturally, we'll never achieve consensus among 20 people on what to view. Therefore, personal entertainment systems like VR headsets will become the preferred device for Martian voyagers. The consideration here is that during the transit through space, everyone can simply float freely. However, once we land on Mars, gravity returns to the equation. Consequently, we do require sufficient furniture for 20 individuals, sofas and chairs, and all that furnishing. Ascending once more, and Deck 7 would be ideal for an office or work area. We will be absent from Earth for nearly 3 years, so we'll require something to occupy our time. They say an idle mind is the devil's workshop, and I'm uncertain what we're expected to do with individuals who experience psychological breakdown, but I would assume we might need to eject you into space. Therefore, it's best to remain occupied. Then at the absolute top of our habitable zone, level 8, let's designate that the flight deck, the bridge, if you prefer to use a Star Trek comparison. This is where the operations of piloting a spacecraft occur. It's also where we secure ourselves for launch and landing. Remember we discussed how SpaceX relocated the landing fuel up into the nose cone so that it wouldn't slosh around? Well, we also don't want to be sloshed around during that pendulum swing that the ship will execute as it transitions from a belly flop to a vertical landing. Therefore, we want to be positioned as high up as possible when that occurs. Assuming we've survived the landing, we are now inhabitants of Mars. The Starship will likely continue serving as our home base for the extent of our stay until we construct Elon's Mars City, which I believe we are contractually obligated to assist with while we're here, but that's an entirely different video.